Hunger drove her to desperate measures as Hannah Daniels crept toward the unattended horse, its saddlebags promising salvation from 3 days of starvation. The dusty Wyoming Territory sun beat down mercilessly, but she had no choice not with her little sister waiting, feverish and hungry, in the dilapidated shack on the outskirts of Laramie. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life in the West had dissolved into a bitter struggle for survival. Hannah's fingers trembled as she reached for the leather saddlebag, her conscience screaming in protest even as her empty stomach urged her onward. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," came a deep voice from behind her. Hannah spun around, nearly losing her footing in the dirt street. Standing before her was a tall man with piercing blue eyes shadowed by the brim of a well-worn Stetson. His stance was relaxed but watchful, one thumb hooked in his belt loop near his holstered Colt. I wasn't." Hannah stammered, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Wasn't about to take something from my saddlebag." The stranger's expression remained unreadable, but his voice carried no immediate threat. "Because it sure looked that way from where I was standing." Hannah straightened her shoulders, despite the fear coursing through her. "I have nothing to say to you, sir. Please let me pass." "Not until you explain why you were rifling through my belongings." He stepped closer, and Hannah noticed the badge pinned to his vest. Deputy Marshal. "It's bread," she whispered, her pride finally crumbling under the weight of her desperation. "I was trying to take your bread. My sister. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. I've gone 3. Something in the man's expression shifted. He studied her face, the hollowed cheeks, the dark circles under once bright eyes. Without a word, he turned to his horse, unbuckled the saddlebag, and held it out to her. "Take it," he said simply. Hannah stared, certain she'd misheard. "I don't understand." "The whole bag. There's bread, dried beef, and some apples in there. Should tide you over for a few days." When she didn't move, he added, "I'm Grant Vance, new deputy in these parts, and you are Hannah Daniels," she replied automatically, still stunned by his offer. "Well, Miss Daniels, I'd rather give you food than arrest you for theft. Now take the bag before I change my mind." Hannah hesitantly accepted the saddlebag, its weight substantial in her thin arms. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll find a way to repay you." Grant Vance tipped his hat. "Just stay out of trouble. That'll be payment enough." Hannah nodded and turned to leave, clutching the precious saddlebag to her chest. She'd taken only a few steps when his voice stopped her again. "Miss Daniels, where can I find you?" "If I wanted to check that your sister is improving." Hannah paused, unsure whether to trust this strange act of kindness. "The old Morgan cabin, east edge of town." With that, she hurried away, unaware that this desperate act would change the course of her life forever. The cabin was little more than a weathered shell, its walls providing minimal protection from the elements. Inside, 10-year-old Emily lay on a thin pallet, her forehead glistening with sweat despite the cool spring air. At Hannah's entrance, her eyes fluttered open. "Hannah." She croaked, her voice weak. "I'm here, sweet pea," Hannah said, rushing to her side. "And look what I've brought." She opened the saddlebag, revealing its bounty. The loaf of bread was crusty and fresh, clearly baked that morning. Beside it lay packages of dried beef, 2 apples, a small container of preserved peaches, and Hannah gasped a small bottle of whiskey that would help bring down Emily's fever. "How did you get all this?" Emily asked, struggling to sit up. Hannah hesitated, unwilling to admit her attempted theft. "A kind man helped us," she said simply, breaking off a small piece of bread and soaking it in water for her sister. "Here, eat slowly now." As Emily ate, Hannah contemplated the strange encounter. Grant Vance had shown her mercy when he could have easily thrown her in jail. In her 20 years of life, Few had shown such kindness without expecting something in return. The next day, as Hannah was hanging their few clothes to dry on a makeshift line outside the cabin, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. Deputy Grant Vance sat atop his dappled gray horse, another saddlebag slung across his saddle. "Miss Daniels," he greeted, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "I hope I'm not intruding." Hannah wiped her hands on her faded dress. "Not at all, Deputy. I wanted to thank you again for your kindness yesterday." "How's your sister?" he asked, glancing toward the cabin. "The fever's down some. The food helped more than you know." Grant nodded, looking uncomfortable for a moment before reaching into his new saddlebag. "I brought some more supplies. Just some basic things: flour, sugar, coffee. And there's medicine from Doc Sullivan. Said it would help with fever." Hannah stared at him in disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Grant's eyes met hers directly. "My ma and sister were in a similar spot when I was young. No one helped them. I swore if I ever saw someone in need, I wouldn't look away." He paused. "Besides, I'm new to Laramie. Don't know many folks yet. So I'm a charity case and a way to ingratiate yourself with the townsfolk," Hannah replied, immediately regretting her sharp tone. To her surprise, Grant laughed, a warm, genuine sound that softened his otherwise stern features. "Hardly. Most folks in town don't even know you're out here. And honestly, Miss Daniels, you don't seem like the type to accept charity easily." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm not. But for Emily, I'll swallow my pride." "That's what family does," he agreed. "May I meet her?" After a moment's hesitation, Hannah nodded and led him into the cabin. Emily was sitting up now, her dark hair tangled around her pale face. Her eyes widened at the sight of the tall stranger filling the doorway. "Emily, this is Deputy Vance. He's the one who provided our food yesterday." "Call me Grant, please," he said, kneeling beside Emily's pallet. "How are you feeling, Miss Emily?" "Better today," Emily replied shyly. "Thank you for the food, sir." "You're most welcome." Grant smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I've brought some medicine that should help you feel even better." As Hannah watched Grant gently explain the medicine to Emily, a strange feeling bloomed in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had shown them kindness that she hardly knew how to respond. Part of her wanted to trust him completely, while another, the part hardened by years of disappointment, warned her to remain cautious. After ensuring Emily took the medicine, Grant turned to Hannah. "I should get going. Town business to attend to." "Of course," Hannah replied, following him outside. "I don't know how to thank you." Grant mounted his horse with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "No thanks necessary, but if you're looking for work, Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house mentioned needing help. Pays fair and includes meals." Hannah's eyes widened. "You asked about work for me, mentioned I knew someone looking. That's all." He adjusted his hat. "Thought you might prefer earning your way over handouts." The fact that he had understood this about her after such a brief acquaintance left Hannah momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I'll speak with her tomorrow." Grant nodded. "I'll check back in a few days if that's all right. Make sure the medicine's working." As Hannah watched him ride away, she realized that, for the first time in months, a small flicker of hope had ignited within her. Perhaps Laramie might become home after all. The next morning, Hannah made herself as presentable as possible in her faded blue dress, the only one without visible patches. After ensuring Emily was comfortable with broth and bread within reach, she made her way into town. The Holloway boarding house stood on the main street, a two-story white building with green shutters and a well-tended garden. Taking a deep breath, Hannah knocked on the front door. The woman who answered was plump and pleasant-faced, with gray-streaked brown hair tucked into a neat bun. "Yes, dear, can I help you, Mrs. Holloway? I'm Hannah Daniels. Deputy Vance mentioned you might be looking for help. Recognition dawned in the older woman's eyes. Yes, indeed. The deputy spoke highly of you, said you were new to town and looking for honest work. She opened the door wider. Come in, come in. We can discuss the position over tea. The interior of the boarding house was clean and homey, with polished wood floors and simple but attractive furnishings. Mrs. Holloway led Hannah to a small sitting room and poured tea from a waiting pot. Now then, she said, settling into an armchair. I need someone reliable to help with cleaning, laundry, and occasionally serving meals to my boarders. Hours would be from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, 6 days a week. Sundays off, of course. That sounds perfect, Hannah said eagerly. I'm a hard worker, Mrs. Holloway, and I learn quickly. I've no doubt. The older woman studied her. Deputy Vance mentioned you have a sister, Hannah nodded. Emily. She's 10, she's been ill, but she's improving. Poor dear. Well, you're welcome to bring her here while you work once she's well enough. There's a small room off the kitchen where she could rest or read. Mrs. Holloway took a sip of tea. The position includes midday dinner, and you're welcome to take home any leftover food from the boarders' meals. Hannah could hardly believe her good fortune. That's very generous. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow, if you're able. I'll be here, Hannah promised, her mind already calculating how this position would change their circumstances. Steady employment, meals, and a safe place for Emily during the day, it was more than she dared hope for. As they finalized the details, Mrs. Holloway added casually, Deputy Vance has taken rooms here, you know. Top floor, front corner. He's a quiet boarder, keeps to himself mostly. A good man, though. You can tell by the little things. Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the mention of Grant. He's been very kind to us. Mrs. Holloway's eyes twinkled knowingly. Not many men would notice a woman in need and offer help without expectations, especially one as pretty as you. I'm sure he'd have done the same for anyone, Hannah replied quickly. Perhaps, Mrs. Holloway conceded with a smile, but I've been around long enough to recognize a man with interest in his eyes. Hannah left the boarding house with a job, a friendly employer, and a confusing flutter in her stomach at Mrs. Holloway's implications. As she walked back to the cabin, she reminded herself sternly that romantic notions were a luxury she couldn't afford. Her priority was Emily and establishing security, nothing more. Yet as she prepared a small celebration meal from their supplies that evening, Hannah found her thoughts returning to Grant Vance, his unexpected kindness, the dimple that appeared with his rare smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he looked at Emily. Hannah. Emily's voice broke into her thoughts. You're burning the cornbread. Hannah quickly rescued their dinner, laughing at her own distraction. Sorry, sweet pea, I was wool gathering. About Deputy Vance? Emily asked with surprising perception. Hannah gave her sister a mock stern look. About our good fortune. I start work tomorrow at the boarding house. Emily's face lit up. Really? Does that mean we can stay in Laramie? It does, Hannah confirmed, setting their simple meal on the small table. And Mrs. Holloway says you can come with me once you're feeling better. There's a room where you can rest or read while I work. And will we see Deputy Vance there? Mrs. Holloway said he lives at the boarding house. Hannah raised an eyebrow. When did Mrs. Holloway tell you that? You just did, Emily replied with a mischievous smile. You said Mrs. Holloway says, and I made a guess. You little trickster, Hannah laughed, reaching over to ruffle Emily's hair. You're feeling better if you're being so clever. I like him, Emily said, suddenly serious. He talks to me like I'm a person, not just a child. And he looks at you like Pa used to look at Ma. Hannah swallowed hard, both at the mention of their parents and the implication of Emily's words. You hardly know him, Em, and neither do I. But we will. Emily declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "I can tell." Hannah shook her head but couldn't completely suppress a smile. "Eat your dinner, you impossible girl. Tomorrow's an important day." That night, as Emily slept soundly for the first time in days, Hannah sat by the cabin's single window, gazing at the stars above Laramie. 4 days ago, she'd been desperate enough to attempt theft. Now she had food, medicine, employment, and the beginnings of what might become friendship. And it had all started because she tried to steal bread from a saddlebag. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Hannah dressed carefully, packed a small lunch for Emily, who was still too weak to accompany her, and gave her sister instructions to rest and keep the cabin door locked. "I'll be back by mid-afternoon," she promised. "And I'll bring something special from Mrs. Holloway's kitchen if I can." "I'll be fine," Emily assured her. "I feel much better today." With a final hug, Hannah set off for town, her steps light despite her nervousness. She arrived at the boarding house precisely at 7, and Mrs. Holloway greeted her with a warm smile and a cup of coffee. "You'll need this to keep up with the morning rush," she said, handing Hannah a clean apron. "Most of the boarders take breakfast between 7 and 8 before heading to their jobs." Hannah tied the apron around her waist. "Just tell me what to do and I'll get started." "That's what I like to hear. First, help me serve breakfast, then we'll tackle the upstairs rooms." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Hannah served eggs, biscuits, and coffee to a dozen boarders, mostly men who worked at the railroad office, bank, or various businesses in town. Grant wasn't among them, and Hannah told herself the twinge of disappointment she felt was ridiculous. After breakfast, she learned the boarding house routine, changing bedding, sweeping, dusting, and helping with laundry. Mrs. Holloway was a patient teacher, and by midday, Hannah felt she had a good grasp of her duties. "You're a quick study," Mrs. Holloway commented as they prepared the midday meal for the few boarders who returned for dinner. "And you've got a good hand with pastry." She nodded approvingly at the apple tarts Hannah had assembled. "My mother taught me," Hannah said softly, "before she and Pa died of influenza 2 winters ago." Mrs. Holloway's face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, dear. It's a hard thing to lose parents, especially when you're still young yourself. We managed in Missouri for a while. I took in sewing, and a neighbor lady looked after Emily during the day, but work dried up, and when we heard about opportunities out west." Hannah shrugged. "It seemed worth trying." "It's not an easy life for women alone," Mrs. Holloway acknowledged. "But you've got grit, Hannah Daniels, and that counts for more than anything out here." The back door opened then, and Grant Vance stepped into the kitchen, removing his hat as he entered. He looked momentarily surprised to see Hannah, then smiled. "Miss Daniels, Mrs. Holloway mentioned you might be starting today." "Deputy," Hannah greeted him, suddenly conscious of her flushed face and the loose strands of hair that had escaped her bun during the morning's work. "Just in time for dinner," Mrs. Holloway said cheerfully. "Sit down, Deputy. Hannah's made apple tarts that would make an angel weep." Grant took a seat at the kitchen table as Hannah served him a plate of stew and biscuits, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his appreciative smile. "How's your sister today?" he asked between bites. "Much improved, thanks to the medicine you brought." "She wanted to come with me, but I thought another day of rest would be better." "Wise decision," he agreed, "though I'm sure she's eager to explore the town." "Emily's curious about everything," Hannah said, a fond smile softening her features. "Always has been." "Sounds like someone else I know," Grant replied with a meaningful look that made Hannah's cheeks warm again. Mrs. Holloway busied herself at the stove, but Hannah could see the older woman's knowing smile. To change the subject, she asked, "Any interesting news from town today, Deputy?" Grant's expression sobered slightly. Nothing too concerning. Some cattle rustling reported north of town, but that's Sheriff Turner's jurisdiction. Here in Laramie, it's been quiet. That's how we like it, Mrs. Holloway interjected, though I imagine quiet days make for dull work for a lawman. I prefer dull to dangerous, Grant replied. Seen enough trouble to last a lifetime. There was something in his tone that made Hannah wonder what experiences had shaped him before he came to Laramie. Before she could consider it further, Mrs. Holloway was handing her a wrapped package. For Emily, she explained. Leftover biscuits, some stew, and one of those apple tarts. Can't have the child going hungry while her sister works so hard. Thank you, Hannah said gratefully. This will make her day. I'm heading back out that way, Grant said, rising from his chair. I can escort you home when you're finished here. Hannah hesitated. That's not necessary, it's on my way, he insisted, and it would be my pleasure. Mrs. Holloway gave Hannah an encouraging nod. Go on, dear. You've worked hard today, I can manage the rest. And so, just after 3 o'clock, Hannah found herself walking alongside Grant Vance, his horse following obediently behind as they made their way toward the cabin. The spring afternoon was pleasant, with wildflowers dotting the grassland surrounding the town. You didn't really have business out this way, did you? Hannah asked after they'd walked in companionable silence for a while. Grant's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Not official business, no. Then why offer to walk me home? Maybe I enjoy your company, he said simply. Hannah studied him from the corner of her eye. Grant Vance was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and those startlingly blue eyes, but it was his quiet confidence and kindness that she found most appealing. You hardly know me, she pointed out. I'd like to change that, he replied. When she remained silent, he added, Unless I'm being too forward. Hannah shook her head. Not too forward, just unexpected. I'm not used to anyone taking an interest. That surprises me, Grant said. A woman like you, intelligent, resourceful, devoted to her sister, seems like someone worth knowing. His sincere tone made it difficult for Hannah to maintain her usual wariness. You're very kind, Deputy Vance. Grant, he corrected gently. And it's not kindness to state facts, Miss Daniels. Hannah, she offered in return, a small surrender. They reached the cabin to find Emily sitting outside on an old crate soaking up the sunshine. Her face brightened at the sight of them. Hannah, Deputy Vance, look what I found. She held up a small blue flower. Isn't it pretty? I've started a collection. It's beautiful, Grant agreed, crouching beside her to examine the flower. That's a blue flax. They're all over Wyoming this time of year. Emily beamed at him. Do you know about flowers? A little. My mother loved wildflowers. She taught me their names when I was about your age. His expression grew nostalgic for a moment before he smiled again. Perhaps you can show me your collection sometime. Tomorrow, Emily decided, when I come to the boarding house with Hannah. Grant glanced up at Hannah with raised eyebrows. Tomorrow, if she's feeling up to it, Hannah hedged. Mrs. Holloway said she could stay in the room off the kitchen. I'm feeling much better, Emily insisted, and I want to see where Hannah works. Then I look forward to seeing both Daniel's sisters tomorrow, Grant said, rising to his feet. For now, though, I should get back to town. As he mounted his horse, he tipped his hat to them both. Good evening, ladies. Thank you for walking us home, Hannah said. Anytime, Grant replied, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment before he turned his horse and rode away. Emily watched him go with a satisfied expression. He likes you, she declared once he was out of earshot. You've mentioned that before, Hannah said dryly, guiding her sister back inside the cabin. Now tell me about these flowers while we have our dinner. That evening, as they ate Mrs. Holloway's generous offerings, Hannah found herself telling Emily about her day at the boarding house, the various boarders, Mrs. Holloway's kindness, and the sense of purpose she'd felt while working. "It sounds wonderful," Emily sighed. "I can't wait to see it tomorrow." "Only if you're truly feeling strong enough," Hannah cautioned. "It's a fair walk to town." "I am," Emily insisted. "The medicine really helped, and besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "I want to see Deputy Vance again." Hannah laughed despite herself. "You're incorrigible." "I don't know what that means, but I think it's true," Emily agreed cheerfully. "Will you tell me a story tonight, like Ma used to?" Hannah's heart squeezed at the request. "Of course." As Emily settled into her pallet, Hannah began a familiar tale about a brave princess who rescued herself from a tower. It had been their mother's favorite story to tell them, one where the heroine relied on her own wits rather than waiting for a prince. Yet as Hannah spoke the familiar words, she found herself wondering if perhaps there was room in life for both self-reliance and the support of someone who truly cared. It was a new thought, one that followed her into dreams filled with blue eyes and the scent of spring wildflowers. The next 6 weeks fell into a pleasant rhythm. Hannah worked at the boarding house 6 days a week, gradually taking on more responsibility as Mrs. Holloway came to trust her abilities. Emily, now fully recovered, spent her days in the small room off the kitchen, reading books borrowed from Mrs. Holloway's collection or helping with simple tasks like folding napkins or shelling peas. Grant became a regular presence in their lives. Though his duties as deputy kept him busy, he made time to check on them daily, sharing meals at the boarding house, escorting them home in the evenings, or bringing small gifts like a ribbon for Emily's hair or a book of poetry Hannah had mentioned wanting to read. With her first wages, Hannah had purchased fabric to make new dresses for herself and Emily. In the evenings, she sewed by lamplight, transforming the simple cotton into garments that, while not fancy, were clean and well-made. "You have a gift for sewing," Grant commented one evening as he walked them home, noticing Emily's new blue dress. "The stitching is very fine." "Hannah's the best seamstress in Missouri," Emily declared proudly. "She made dresses for all the ladies in our town." "Is that so?" Grant looked at Hannah with renewed interest. "Have you considered offering your services here in Laramie? There's no proper dressmaker in town. Mrs. Turner at the general store sells ready-made goods, but nothing custom." Hannah hesitated. "I've thought of it, but I wouldn't want to leave Mrs. Holloway short-handed." "Perhaps you could start small," Grant suggested. "Take on a few commissions in your free time. If demand grows, you could discuss reducing your hours at the boarding house." The idea took root in Hannah's mind. That night, after Emily was asleep, she pulled out the small sewing kit she'd carried all the way from Missouri and began sketching designs on scraps of paper. Having her own business again, even a small one, would provide additional security and fulfill the creative passion she'd set aside during their difficult journey west. The next day, she broached the subject with Mrs. Holloway, who surprised her with immediate enthusiasm. "What a wonderful idea!" the older woman exclaimed. "In fact, I've been meaning to commission a new Sunday dress myself. Would you consider making it?" "I'd be honored," Hannah replied, deeply touched by the vote of confidence. "And I'll spread the word among the ladies in town. The sewing circle meets here every Thursday. You should join us and bring some samples of your work." By the end of the week, Hannah had secured 3 commissions: Mrs. Holloway's Sunday dress, a blouse for the banker's wife, and a dress for Mrs. Turner's daughter's upcoming 16th birthday. Each evening, after returning from the boarding house, she worked on these projects while Emily read aloud from her latest book. It was on one such evening, nearly 2 months after their arrival in Laramie, that a knock at their cabin door startled them both. Hannah set aside her sewing and approached cautiously. "Who is it, Grant?" came the familiar voice. "Sorry to disturb you so late." Hannah opened the door to find Grant standing there holding a small crate. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "I just wanted to bring you something." He lifted the crate slightly. "May I come in?" Hannah stepped back to allow him entry. The cabin, while still humble, had been transformed by their time in Laramie. Clean curtains hung at the windows, made from fabric remnants. The floor was swept, and wildflowers from Emily's collection brightened the table in a jar. Their few possessions were neatly arranged, and the new dresses hung from pegs on the wall. "What's in the box?" Emily asked excitedly, setting down her book. Grant placed the crate on the table and removed the lid to reveal a tiny orange kitten blinking sleepily at them. "Oh," Emily gasped, her face lighting up with delight. "Found her behind the jail," Grant explained. "No sign of her mother or any other kittens. Thought you ladies might like some company." Emily was already gently lifting the kitten from the crate. "Can we keep her, Hannah, please?" Hannah looked from her sister's hopeful face to Grant's expectant one. "She'll need care, food, water." "Already thought of that," Grant said, producing a small pouch from his pocket. "Dried meat scraps from the butcher, and she's old enough to catch mice, which I noticed you have a few of." Hannah couldn't help but smile at his thoroughness. "You've considered everything." "I try to," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "Then yes, she can stay," Hannah decided, earning a squeal of joy from Emily. "What will you name her?" Grant asked, watching as the kitten curled contentedly in Emily's lap. Emily thought for a moment. "Marigold, because she's orange like the flowers in Mrs. Holloway's garden." "A fine name," Grant agreed. He turned to Hannah. "I heard you've been taking sewing commissions." Hannah nodded. "Word travels fast in Laramie, small towns," Grant said with a shrug. "Mrs. Turner was singing your praises at the general store today. Said the samples you showed her were finer than anything she could order from Denver." Hannah felt a warm glow of pride. "That's very kind of her. It's well deserved from what I can see." Grant nodded toward the half-finished blouse on her sewing table. "Your talent shouldn't go to waste." There was something in his tone that made Hannah study him more closely. "You sound like you have something specific in mind." Grant shifted slightly, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Actually, I do. There's a town social next Saturday night. Dancing, food, music. I was hoping. That is, I'd be honored if you would accompany me." The request caught Hannah completely off guard. She'd been aware of the growing attraction between them, of course. The lingering looks, the way his hand sometimes brushed hers as they walked, the conversations that stretched late into the evening. But this was different, a public declaration of interest. "A social," she repeated, trying to gather her thoughts. "Say yes, Hannah," Emily urged, looking up from petting Marigold. "You deserve some fun." Grant smiled at Emily's enthusiasm but kept his eyes on Hannah. "If you're concerned about Emily, Mrs. Holloway already offered to have her stay at the boarding house for the evening. You discussed this with Mrs. Holloway before asking me?" Hannah raised an eyebrow. Grant had the grace to look sheepish. "I wanted to be sure all arrangements were in place before I imposed on you." "It's hardly an imposition," Hannah said softly. "And yes, I'd be happy to accompany you to the social." The smile that spread across Grant's face was like sunrise breaking over the Wyoming plains, gradual, then suddenly brilliant. "Truly, truly," Hannah confirmed, her own smile matching his. Emily clapped her hands in delight, startling Marigold, who leapt from her lap to explore the cabin. "Oh, Hannah, you'll need a new dress. Something special," Grant cleared his throat. "I should go and let you ladies discuss, whatever it is women discuss before these events. I'll see you tomorrow at the boarding house." As Hannah walked him to the door, he paused on the threshold. "Thank you for saying yes," he said quietly. "I've been working up the courage to ask for weeks." "Have you really?" Hannah asked, surprised by his admission. "You always seem so confident." "Not about this," Grant admitted. "Not about you. You're different from any woman I've known, Hannah Daniels." Before she could respond, he leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Good night," he whispered, then turned and walked into the darkness. Hannah stood in the doorway, her hand rising to touch the spot where his lips had been. Behind her, Emily giggled. "I told you he likes you," she said smugly. Hannah closed the door, unable to suppress her smile. "So you did." The next week passed in a flurry of preparation. Hannah worked on a special dress for the social, a deep green cotton with delicate white embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Holloway, upon hearing of the invitation, insisted on lending Hannah a lace shawl and helped arrange her hair on the evening of the social. "There," the older woman said, securing the final pin. "Lovely as a spring morning." Hannah hardly recognized herself in the small mirror. The green dress complemented her auburn hair, which Mrs. Holloway had arranged in a becoming style with soft curls framing her face. The past months of regular meals had restored fullness to her cheeks, and there was a sparkle in her eyes that had been absent for too long. "You look beautiful," Emily declared from her perch on Mrs. Holloway's bed. "Like a princess in a storybook." "Hardly that," Hannah demurred, though she couldn't help feeling a flutter of excitement. A knock at the boarding house door signaled Grant's arrival. Mrs. Holloway went to answer it, leaving Hannah a final moment with Emily. "You'll be good for Mrs. Holloway tonight?" Hannah asked, kneeling to straighten Emily's collar. "Of course," Emily promised. "We're going to make cookies and she's going to teach me to play checkers." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And I think Deputy Vance is going to ask you to marry him." Hannah nearly lost her balance. "Emily." "What a thing to say. We've only known each other a few months." "So," Emily shrugged. "Ma always said when you know, and he looks at you the way Pa looked at her." Before Hannah could formulate a response, Mrs. Holloway called up the stairs. "Hannah, dear, your escort is waiting." With a final hug for Emily, Hannah made her way downstairs. The expression on Grant's face as she descended made every hour spent on the dress worthwhile. He stood transfixed, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're beautiful," he said simply when she reached him. Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." Grant was dressed in his best, a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and polished boots. His badge was absent, marking this as a personal evening rather than official duty. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, which Hannah accepted with a smile. The town hall had been transformed for the social. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small band of local musicians played at the front of the room. Nearly everyone in Laramie seemed to be in attendance, from ranchers in their Sunday best to merchants and their families. As they entered, Hannah was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed them. "Everyone's staring," she murmured to Grant. "That's because you're the most beautiful woman in the room," he replied without hesitation. "And because they're all wondering how I got so lucky." His confident response eased her nervousness. Grant introduced her to those she hadn't yet met through her work at the boarding house or her sewing commissions. To her surprise, many people already knew her name and greeted her warmly. "Miss Daniels, your stitching on my daughter's dress is exquisite," Mrs. Turner gushed. "She's wearing it tonight, there she is, with the blue ribbon in her hair. And my wife won't stop talking about that blouse you're making her," added Mr. Peterson, the banker. "Says it's finer than anything she had back east." As the evening progressed, Hannah found herself relaxing, enjoying the music, food, and especially Grant's company. He was attentive without being overwhelming, making sure she had refreshments and introducing her to everyone who mattered in Laramie. When the band began playing a waltz, Grant turned to her with a questioning look. "May I have this dance?" Hannah hesitated. "I'm afraid I'm not very practiced. It's been years since I danced." "I'm not exactly a dancing master myself," Grant admitted with a smile. "We can be unpracticed together." He led her to the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her hand with the other. As they began to move with the music, Hannah's initial stiffness gradually melted away. Grant was a better dancer than he'd claimed, guiding her with subtle pressure and anticipating her movements. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked as he expertly turned her. "My mother insisted," he replied. "Said no son of hers would step on a lady's toes at a social." "She taught you well," Hannah said. "Tell me about your family." Grant's expression softened. "My mother was the strongest person I've ever known. Raised my sister and me alone after my father died in the war. Worked as a schoolteacher in Colorado. Never complained even when times were hard." "And your sister?" "Married to a rancher near Denver. 2 children with another on the way." His eyes crinkled with pride. "She writes regularly, wants me to visit once the baby arrives." "You should go," Hannah said. "Family is precious." "I know," Grant replied, his gaze intent. "Which is why I admire how you've cared for Emily. Many would have placed her with another family after your parents died, but you kept her with you even through hardship." "She's all I have," Hannah said simply. "Or was until Laramie." Grant's hand tightened slightly on hers. "And now?" The question hung between them as the music ended. Before Hannah could respond, Sheriff Turner approached, his expression apologetic. "Hate to interrupt, Deputy, but we've got trouble at the Golden Nugget. Fight broke out between some cowboys and railroad men." Grant's face immediately shifted to professional concern. "Anyone hurt? Bruises and bloody noses so far, but it's escalating. Need your help to break it up before someone pulls a gun." Grant turned to Hannah, regret evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry, go," she said immediately. "It's your duty." "I'll take you back to the boarding house first," he insisted. "No need," Mrs. Turner interjected, having overheard. "The ladies and I were just leaving. We'll see Miss Daniels safely home." Grant hesitated, clearly torn between his responsibility and his desire to remain with Hannah. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Emily's waiting up for me anyway." With obvious reluctance, Grant nodded. "I'll come by tomorrow," he promised, then followed Sheriff Turner out of the hall, as Hannah walked back to the boarding house with Mrs. Turner and several other ladies. She found herself reflecting on the evening. Despite its abrupt end, it had been magical, the kind of night she had stopped believing was possible after their parents died, and the burden of survival fell on her shoulders. Mrs. Holloway was waiting up when she returned, darning socks by the fire while Emily had fallen asleep on the sofa, Marigold curled at her feet. "There you are, dear," the older woman greeted her. "I heard about the trouble at the saloon. The deputy had to leave," Hannah nodded, removing her shawl. "Sheriff Turner came for him. Some kind of fight. Common enough on Saturday nights," Mrs. Holloway sighed. "Though Grant prefers to prevent trouble rather than break it up afterward. He's got a good head on his shoulders, that one." "Yes, he does," Hannah agreed, sitting beside the sleeping Emily and gently stroking her hair. Mrs. Holloway studied her with knowing eyes. "The two of you make a handsome couple. Half the town is already speculating on when he'll propose." Hannah looked up sharply. "That's premature. We've only known each other a few months." "Time doesn't always matter in matters of the heart," Mrs. Holloway said sagely. "My Charles asked me to marry him after 6 weeks' acquaintance. We had 42 happy years together before he passed." The parallel to Emily's earlier comments was not lost on Hannah. "I'm not looking for marriage," she said carefully. "My focus has been establishing security for Emily and myself." "And you've done admirably," Mrs. Holloway acknowledged. "But there comes a point, my dear, when it's all right to want something for yourself as well." Hannah had no response to this gentle wisdom. Instead, she gathered the sleeping Emily in her arms. "I should get her to bed. Thank you for watching her tonight." "Anytime, dear." "That little girl is a joy." Mrs. Holloway helped her settle Emily and gather their belongings. "Just remember what I said. Life's too short not to grasp happiness when it's offered." Hannah carried Emily to their room at the back of the boarding house where they now lived instead of the remote cabin. As she tucked her sister into bed, Emily stirred slightly. "Did you have a nice time?" she murmured sleepily. "I did," Hannah whispered. "Now go back to sleep." "Did he ask you to marry him?" Emily persisted, eyes still closed. Hannah sighed. "No, he did not, and you shouldn't be expecting such things." "But he will," Emily mumbled as she drifted back to sleep. "I just know it." Hannah changed into her nightgown and slipped into bed beside her sister, but sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to the dance, to the feel of Grant's hand at her waist, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. And beneath those pleasant memories ran a current of anxiety. What if Emily and Mrs. Holloway were right? What if Grant's intentions were serious? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After years of independence, of making every decision with only Emily's welfare in mind, the prospect of sharing her life with someone else was daunting. Yet there was an undeniable longing in her heart for the kind of partnership her parents had shared, a union of equals, built on respect and affection. Grant Vance, with his quiet strength and unwavering kindness, had awakened feelings Hannah had long ago buried beneath the necessities of survival. The question now was whether she had the courage to acknowledge those feelings, not just to herself, but to him. Morning arrived with no answers, but Hannah rose determined to focus on the day ahead rather than uncertain futures. It was Sunday, their day off from the boarding house, and she had promised Emily they would attend church and then have a picnic by the creek if the weather held. As they dressed in their Sunday best, Hannah noticed Emily watching her with unusual intensity. "What is it?" she asked, smoothing her sister's hair into a neat braid. "Are you happy here in Laramie?" Emily asked unexpectedly. Hannah paused, surprised by the question. "Yes, I am, aren't you?" Emily nodded vigorously. "I love it here, Mrs. Holloway is nice, and I have friends at school now in Marigold, and—" she hesitated before adding, "and Deputy Vance is like family." The simple statement caught Hannah off guard. "Emily, he is," Emily insisted. "He checks on us every day, brings us things we need, teaches me about animals and plants. That's what family does." Hannah couldn't argue with her sister's logic. Grant had indeed become a constant in their lives, reliable, supportive, and caring. Whether that constituted family was a more complicated question. "Let's finish getting ready," she said instead of addressing Emily's observation directly. "We don't want to be late for services." The small church was filled with familiar faces when they arrived. Hannah spotted Mrs. Holloway near the front and was about to join her when she noticed Grant sitting alone in a pew toward the back. He smiled when he saw them, moving over to make room. "Good morning," he greeted them quietly as they slid in beside him. "I hope you weren't too disappointed by my hasty departure last night." "Not at all," Hannah assured him. "Duty comes first. Still, I'd hoped for a more proper ending to our evening." His eyes held hers for a meaningful moment before shifting to Emily. "And how are you this morning, Miss Emily?" "Very well, thank you," Emily replied with unusual formality that made Grant's mouth twitch with suppressed amusement. As the service began, Hannah found herself acutely aware of Grant beside her, the clean scent of his soap. The way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers as he shifted, the deep rumble of his voice as he joined in the hymns. There was a comforting familiarity to his presence that felt simultaneously new and as old as time. After the service, Grant walked with them into the sunshine. "I heard mention of a picnic," he asked, clearly having overheard their earlier conversation. Emily nodded enthusiastically. "By the creek. Hannah packed fried chicken and biscuits. Sounds delicious," Grant commented. "I don't suppose you packed enough for 3. Hannah smiled at his hopeful expression. "I might have anticipated company." Grant's face lit up. "Then allow me to provide transportation." He gestured to his wagon parked nearby. "Much easier than walking all that way with your picnic basket." The creek lay about a mile outside of town, a peaceful spot where cottonwoods provided shade and the clear water bubbled over smooth stones. Several families had the same idea on this fine Sunday, but Grant found them a secluded spot around a bend where a fallen log provided a natural bench. Emily immediately removed her shoes to wade in the shallow water, searching for interesting stones and calling out her discoveries. Hannah spread a blanket on the grass and began unpacking their meal while Grant unhitched his horse to let it graze nearby. "Everything all right at the saloon last night?" Hannah asked as he joined her on the blanket. "Sorted out eventually," Grant replied, accepting a plate from her. "No serious injuries, thankfully, just wounded pride and a few broken chairs." "What was the fight about?" Grant shook his head ruefully. "What are such fights ever about? A perceived insult, too much whiskey, and men with more pride than sense." One of the cowboys claimed a railroad man cheated at cards. Words were exchanged, then fists. "Seems so pointless," Hannah commented, watching Emily carefully balancing on stones in the creek. "Most violence is," Grant agreed. "That's why I became a lawman. Seeing too much senseless fighting during the war made me want to prevent it where I could." Hannah glanced at him, curious about this glimpse into his past. "You fought in the war," Grant nodded, his expression sobering. "Union cavalry, 4 years that felt like 40. He was quiet for a moment before adding, "Lost a lot of good men, made me value peace all the more." Hannah reached out impulsively and laid her hand over his. "I'm sorry you had to see such things." Grant turned his hand to clasp hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "It was a long time ago, and it led me here, so I can't regret the path entirely." The significance of his words hung in the air between them. Before Hannah could respond, Emily's excited voice broke the moment. "Hannah, Deputy Vance, look what I found." She came splashing toward them, her dress hem wet despite Hannah's warnings, clutching something in her cupped hands. Kneeling beside them, she carefully opened her fingers to reveal a tiny, perfect frog, bright green against her palm. "Isn't he wonderful?" She breathed, her face alight with discovery. "Magnificent," Grant agreed solemnly, leaning forward to examine the creature. "That's a tree frog. They're excellent climbers. Can I keep him?" Emily asked hopefully. Hannah shook her head. "He belongs here by the creek, Em. He needs to be with his family and find his own food." Emily's face fell momentarily, but she nodded in understanding. "I'll put him back under his favorite leaf," she decided, carefully carrying the frog back to the water's edge. Grant watched her go with admiration. "You've raised her well." Many children would have argued or tried to smuggle the frog home anyway. "She's always had a good heart," Hannah said, her voice soft with pride. "Even with everything we've been through, she's remained kind and understanding." "Like her sister," Grant observed, his eyes returning to Hannah's face. Hannah looked down, uncomfortable with the praise. "I've done what was necessary, that's all." "No," Grant said firmly. "You've done far more than necessary. You've kept your sister safe, maintained your dignity through hardship, and created a new life for both of you through sheer determination. That's extraordinary, Hannah." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she managed, "for seeing that. And for helping us when you could have simply arrested me that day." Grant's expression grew tender. "Best decision I ever made, giving you that saddlebag instead of a jail cell." Hannah laughed softly at the memory. "I was terrified, and so desperate." "I could see that," Grant said. "The fear in your eyes, but also the resolve. I knew immediately you weren't a common thief." "Just an uncommon one," Hannah teased. "Just a woman doing whatever it took to survive," Grant corrected gently. "I admired that then, and I admire everything I've learned about you since." There was a weight to his words that made Hannah's heart beat faster. Grant shifted slightly, turning to face her more directly. "Hannah," he began, his voice taking on a serious tone, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you, Snake." Emily's shriek cut through the air, making them both jump to their feet. "There's a snake by the water." Grant was already moving, reaching Emily in seconds. "Where?" he asked calmly, scanning the creek bank. Emily pointed with a shaking finger to a spot near where she'd been waiting. "There." "It's big and black." Grant's tense shoulders relaxed immediately. "Ah, that's just a bull snake, Emily. Completely harmless to humans. In fact, they're beneficial. They eat rodents that might otherwise get into grain stores." Emily looked skeptical. "Are you sure it won't bite me?" "It might if you tried to pick it up," Grant acknowledged. "But it's not venomous, and it's more afraid of you than you are of it. See? It's already slithering away." Sure enough, the snake was disappearing into the undergrowth, clearly wanting nothing to do with humans. Emily watched it go with fascination, replacing her fear. "I've never seen one so close before," she admitted. "In Missouri, Ma always told us to stay away from snakes." "That's good advice generally," Grant agreed. "But it's also good to know which ones are dangerous and which ones aren't. Maybe next time we come out here, I can teach you about the local wildlife." "I'd like that," Emily said, beaming at him. Hannah watched this exchange with a swelling heart. Grant's patience with Emily, his willingness to teach rather than dismiss her fears, the natural way he included both of them in future plans, all spoke of a man who saw them not as temporary figures in his life, but as permanent ones. The rest of their picnic passed pleasantly, with Grant pointing out various birds and plants to Emily while Hannah listened, content to see her sister so engaged and happy. As the afternoon waned and other families began packing up to return to town, Grant helped them gather their belongings. "Thank you for including me today," he said as they loaded the wagon. "Best Sunday I've had in a long time." "Thank you for coming," Hannah replied. "And for the snake identification, I'm not sure I would have been as calm." Grant smiled. "Growing up in Colorado, you learn which creatures to respect from a distance and which ones are harmless. My father taught me before he went off to war." As they drove back toward town, Emily fell asleep between them, lulled by the rocking of the wagon and the warm afternoon sun. Hannah glanced down at her peaceful face, then up to find Grant watching them both with an expression that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking," he replied, his voice equally quiet, "about how complete this feels, the three of us together." The simple statement resonated deeply within Hannah. It did feel complete, as though a circle had been drawn around them, creating a space where they all belonged. "It does, doesn't it?" she admitted. Grant's eyes held hers for a long moment before returning to the road. "Hannah, what I was trying to ask before, Deputy Vance." The call came from behind them as a rider approached at a gallop. "Message from the sheriff." Grant pulled the wagon to a halt, his expression shifting to professional concern as a young man Hannah recognized as the sheriff's deputy rode alongside them. Baker brothers been spotted heading toward Laramie, the young deputy reported breathlessly. Sheriff's gathering a posse. Wants you to meet him at the office right away. Hannah felt Grant tense beside her. The Baker brothers were notorious outlaws who had robbed 3 banks in neighboring counties over the past month. Their presence near Laramie meant trouble. Tell him I'll be there directly, Grant replied. He turned to Hannah, conflict evident in his face. I need to take you home first. We're nearly there, Hannah said. I can manage from here. You should go. Are you certain? Hannah nodded firmly. Duty comes first. Remember, we'll be fine. Grant hesitated for only a moment before handing her the reins. Take care, he said, his eyes conveying all the words left unspoken between them. You too, Hannah replied, suddenly afraid for him. Please be careful. Grant swung down from the wagon and mounted behind the other deputy. I'll come find you when it's over, he promised, then rode off toward town. Hannah watched until they disappeared from sight, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Emily stirred beside her, awakened by the commotion. Where's Deputy Vance going? She asked sleepily. He had to help the sheriff with something important, Hannah explained, keeping her voice calm despite her worry. We'll see him later. They returned to the boarding house to find Mrs. Holloway in a state of nervous excitement. You've heard the news? She asked as soon as they entered. The Baker gang's been spotted nearby. Sheriffs formed a posse to intercept them before they reached town. We know, Hannah said, helping Emily remove her coat. Deputy Vance was called away to join them. Mrs. Holloway's face softened with understanding. You're worried about him. It wasn't a question, and Hannah didn't bother denying it. Yes. Grant Vance can handle himself, Mrs. Holloway assured her. He faced worse in the war from what little he's told me, and Sheriff Turner's no fool. He won't let his men take unnecessary risks. Hannah nodded, trying to take comfort in the older woman's words. I hope they're back soon. As do we all, Mrs. Holloway agreed. Now let's keep busy while we wait. I've got bread dough rising that needs punching down, and I believe someone promised to help me bake cookies earlier. She winked at Emily, who brightened immediately. Can I help too? She asked Hannah. Of course, Hannah replied, grateful for the distraction. Let's change out of our Sunday clothes first. The afternoon stretched into evening as they baked, prepared dinner for the boarders, and tried not to speculate about what might be happening outside of town. Several of the male boarders had joined the posse, leaving the dinner table half empty and conversation subdued. Night fell with no word. Hannah put Emily to bed with a story, though she could tell her sister was as preoccupied as she was. After Emily finally drifted off, Hannah joined Mrs. Holloway in the kitchen, where the older woman was making a fresh pot of coffee. Might as well stay up, Mrs. Holloway said, handing Hannah a cup. I won't sleep until we know they're safe. Hannah accepted the coffee gratefully. Do you think she was interrupted by the sound of horses outside, followed by men's voices? Both women rushed to the window to see the posse returning, tired but apparently intact. Hannah's eyes scanned the group anxiously until she spotted Grant, dismounting in front of the sheriff's office across the street. Thank God, Mrs. Holloway breathed. They're back. Hannah set down her cup with shaking hands. Excuse me, she murmured, heading for the door. Outside, the night air was cool against her flushed cheeks as she hurried across the street. The men were dispersing, heading for homes or the saloon to unwind after the tense hours of pursuit. Sheriff Turner was speaking to a small group, including Grant, who looked up at her approach. The weariness in his face gave way to warmth as he excused himself and came to meet her. You're safe, Hannah said, relief evident in her voice. I am, Grant confirmed, and so is Laramie. We intercepted the Baker brothers before they reached town. They're in custody now, along with 2 of their gang. Were you? Hannah hesitated, searching his face and form for signs of injury. Was anyone hurt? One of the outlaws took a bullet in the shoulder when he tried to run. Otherwise, just minor scrapes from the pursuit. Grant's eyes softened as he took in her concerned expression. Were you worried? Of course I was, Hannah admitted, beyond caring if her feelings were obvious. When you rode off like that. Grant stepped closer, his voice dropping to ensure privacy despite the activity around them. Hannah, there's something I need to say to you, something I've been trying to say all day. Hannah's heart beat faster at the intensity in his gaze. Yes. Not here, Grant decided, glancing around at the townspeople still milling about. Will you walk with me? Just for a few minutes. Hannah nodded and Grant offered his arm. They walked in silence until they reached the small town square, where a single gas lamp cast a warm glow over the wooden benches. No one else was about at this hour, giving them a rare moment of privacy. Grant guided her to a bench and sat beside her, turning to face her directly. I've rehearsed this a dozen different ways, he began, his usual confidence giving way to endearing nervousness. But now that the moment's here, I find myself at a loss for words. That doesn't sound like the Grant Vance I know, Hannah said gently, hoping to ease his tension. He always knows exactly what to say. Grant smiled ruefully. Not about this. This is too important to get wrong. He took her hands in his touch warm and steady. Hannah, from the moment I saw you trying to take bread from my saddlebag, something in me recognized you not as a thief, but as someone I needed to know. These past months have only confirmed what I somehow sensed that first day. Hannah's breath caught as she realized where this was leading. I love you, Grant said simply. I love your strength, your kindness, your devotion to Emily. I love the way you've built a life here through sheer determination. I love how you've opened your heart to me, little by little. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that caught the lamplight. I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I know, with absolute certainty, that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, with both of you. He held the ring between them, his eyes never leaving hers. Hannah Daniels, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Time seemed to suspend as Hannah looked from the ring to Grant's hopeful, nervous face. In that moment, all her carefully constructed independence, all her fears about relying on someone else, all her doubts about whether she deserved such happiness, all of it fell away, leaving only crystal clarity. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, Grant, I will marry you. Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. You've made me the happiest man in Wyoming territory, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And I'm the happiest woman, Hannah replied, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. Grant cupped her face gently in his hands and leaned forward. Their first kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. When they parted, Hannah rested her forehead against his, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. Emily will be ecstatic, she said with a watery laugh. She's been predicting this for weeks. Smart girl, Grant murmured. Saw what was happening before we did. Oh, I think I knew, Hannah admitted. I was just afraid to believe it. No more fear, Grant promised, kissing her again softly. From now on, we face everything together. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, the ring a comfortable weight on Hannah's finger. Mrs. Holloway was waiting up, her knowing smile suggesting she had anticipated this outcome. After sharing their news and accepting her enthusiastic congratulations, Hannah went to check on Emily. Her sister was sleeping peacefully, Marigold curled at her feet. Hannah stood watching her for a long moment. imagining the future that now stretched before them, not just security and stability, but love and family in its truest sense. Grant would be a wonderful father to Emily, and perhaps someday. Hannah touched her ring, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a few months. From desperate theft to deepest love, all because a kind-hearted deputy had seen beyond her circumstances to the woman she truly was. The next morning, Emily's reaction to the news was everything Hannah had expected: a squeal of delight, rapid-fire questions about the wedding, and a healthy dose of "I told you so." "When will you get married?" she demanded over breakfast. "Where will we live? Can I be in the wedding?" Hannah exchanged an amused glance with Grant, who had arrived early to share the news with Emily. "We haven't had time to discuss the details yet, Em." "But soon, right?" Emily persisted. "Before winter," Grant laughed. "Your sister and I will need to talk about the timing." "But yes, I hope it will be soon. You'll need a special dress," Emily declared to Hannah. "The most beautiful one you've ever made." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. They decided on a September wedding, giving Hannah time to make her dress and Grant time to complete work on the house he had purchased on the edge of town, a modest but sturdy 2-story home with a view of the mountains. Word spread quickly throughout Laramie. Mrs. Turner organized a quilting bee to create a wedding gift. Mr. Peterson at the bank offered them a special account for their future. Even Sheriff Turner got involved, promising to ensure Grant had the day off for the ceremony and the week following for a brief honeymoon trip to Denver. Emily threw herself into wedding preparations with characteristic enthusiasm, helping Hannah with her dress and accompanying Grant on visits to their future home to offer decorating suggestions. Watching them together, Hannah's heart swelled with gratitude for the man who had so seamlessly become part of their family. The day before the wedding, as Hannah was making final adjustments to her dress at the boarding house, Mrs. Holloway appeared with a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "A little something old for tomorrow," she explained, handing it to Hannah. "It belonged to my mother, then to me on my wedding day." Hannah unwrapped the package to find a delicate lace handkerchief, yellowed with age but still beautiful. "Mrs. Holloway, I couldn't possibly." "Of course you can," the older woman insisted. "I have no daughters to pass it to, and you've become like family to me, Hannah. It would honor me if you carried it tomorrow." Tears pricked Hannah's eyes as she embraced Mrs. Holloway. "Thank you for everything." "Oh, hush," Mrs. Holloway said, though her own eyes were suspiciously bright. "You've earned every bit of happiness coming your way. Now get some rest. A bride needs her beauty sleep." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of approaching autumn. The small church was filled with nearly everyone in Laramie, all gathered to witness the union of their deputy marshal and the seamstress who had captured his heart. Emily, dressed in a new blue dress Hannah had made for the occasion, stood proudly as her sister's attendant. Mrs. Holloway sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that matched the one tucked into Hannah's bouquet of wildflowers. Sheriff Turner stood as Grant's best man, looking uncomfortable but pleased in his formal attire. And Hannah, in her cream-colored silk dress, with lace she had painstakingly sewn along the collar and hem, walked down the aisle toward the man who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness. Grant's face as he watched her approach was a study in adoration, his blue eyes never leaving hers as she came to stand beside him before the minister. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the hushed church. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When it came time for their vows, Grant's steady voice filled the church. "I, Grant Vance, take you, Hannah Daniels, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Hannah's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the words, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. "By the power vested in me," the minister concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Grant's kiss was gentle yet full of promise, sealing their commitment before God and their community. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Hannah caught Emily's beaming face in the front row and reached out to include her in their embrace. Together, they walked back down the aisle as a family. The celebration afterward at the town hall was joyous, filled with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Hannah and Grant moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone who had come to share their day. As the afternoon waned, Grant led Hannah onto the dance floor for a waltz. "Happy, Mrs. Vance?" he asked as they moved to the music. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. "And you? I got the girl, her sister, and even a cat," Grant said with a smile. "What more could a man ask for?" Hannah laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder briefly. "When I think of how this all began." "With attempted theft," Grant supplied, his eyes twinkling. "It's hardly the romantic beginning most couples have," Hannah admitted. "I disagree," Grant said, spinning her gently. "I think it's the perfect beginning for us. You needed bread, but I needed you even if I didn't know it yet. So I gave you my saddlebag, and now I've given you my hand." "And your heart," Hannah added softly. "And my heart," Grant agreed, his voice equally tender, "always and forever." As the sun set over Laramie, casting golden light through the town hall windows, Hannah Daniels Vance danced in her husband's arms, surrounded by friends who had become family in this place that had become home. From desperation to joy, from hunger to abundance, their journey had only just begun, but she knew with absolute certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. 5 years later, Hannah sat on the front porch of their home, watching as Grant taught their 3-year-old son, James, to ride his new pony in the fenced yard. Emily, now 15 and growing into a beautiful young woman, sat beside her, sketching the scene with the artistic talent that had blossomed over the years. "He looks just like Grant when he laughs," Emily observed, capturing James's delighted expression as the pony trotted in a careful circle. "He does," Hannah agreed, resting her hand on her swollen belly where their second child, a daughter, according to Doc Sullivan, would arrive in just a few months. "Same dimple, same eyes. But he's got your stubborn streak," Emily added with a grin. "Wonder what this one will be like." She nodded toward Hannah's belly. "Time will tell," Hannah replied, "though if she's anything like her aunt, we're in for quite an adventure." Emily beamed at this, setting aside her sketch to place a hand on Hannah's stomach. "I hope she is like me. Then I can teach her all sorts of things: drawing, riding, how to identify wildflowers." "I'm counting on it," Hannah said, covering Emily's hand with her own. The years in Laramie had been good to them all. Grant had been promoted to sheriff after Turner retired, a position that suited his natural leadership and commitment to justice. Hannah's dressmaking business had flourished, with orders coming from as far away as Denver for her designs. Emily had excelled in school and was now talking about becoming a teacher, inspired by the books Grant constantly brought her from his trips to larger towns. Their home had expanded along with their family, a new room added when James was born, a large sewing studio for Hannah's work, bookshelves built by Grant for Emily's growing collection. The simple cabin where Hannah and Emily had first struggled to survive was now used as a storage shed, a reminder of how far they had come. "Pa's letting me try," James called excitedly as Grant carefully lifted him onto the pony's back without the leading rein. "I've got him," Grant assured Hannah, seeing her instinctive maternal concern. "He won't fall." Hannah relaxed, trusting her husband completely. Grant had proven himself the best of fathers, patient, loving, and able to balance protection with the freedom children needed to grow. As she watched her family, Hannah's mind drifted back to that desperate day when hunger had driven her to attempt theft. How close she had come to running when Grant caught her, to missing all of this happiness because of fear or pride. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Grant asked, coming to sit beside her after settling James with Emily for his reading lesson. "I was just thinking about beginnings," Hannah replied, leaning into him as his arm came around her shoulders, "and how the worst days sometimes lead to the best lives." Grant pressed a kiss to her temple, his hand resting protectively over their unborn daughter. "Best decision I ever made, giving you that saddlebag. And I thought I was just getting bread," Hannah said with a smile. "Instead, I got everything I never dared dream of." "We both did," Grant murmured, watching as Emily helped James sound out words from his primer. "A family, a home, a future." As the Wyoming sun sank toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Hannah Vance thanked God for second chances, for kindness offered freely, and for the courage to reach for happiness when it presented itself in the most unexpected ways. From a stolen saddlebag to a shared life, their love story had unfolded in ways neither could have predicted, but both would cherish for all their days.